Alright, it's Tuesday, and we have some very hot news that needs to be published. On the morning of July 14, 2026, a serious shooting incident involving federal law enforcement occurred in Biddeford, Maine, claiming the life of Joan Sebastian Guerrero, a 26-year-old immigrant from Colombia. The incident took place around 7:15 a.m. on a downtown street when agents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement opened fire on a white vehicle driven by Guerrero. Notably, Guerrero held a valid U.S. work permit and a social security number, and he was not the intended target of the ICE operation. He leaves behind a young wife and a 3-year-old daughter. The incident immediately sparked a wave of public outrage in Maine. This marks the second time in less than a week that ICE agents have shot and killed a driver who was not the intended target on American streets, raising grave questions regarding the agency's operational procedures, transparency, and accountability. Contradictory accounts and accountability gaps, the core issues fueling public outrage and casting serious doubt on the transparency of law enforcement center on two factors: inconsistencies regarding the reason for opening fire. Scenario 1. Weaponizing the vehicle. Initially, the head of the Department of Public Safety, DPS, told Senator Angus King that the victim had weaponized the vehicle, using it to ram an officer in an attempt to resist. This is a classic self-defense justification often cited by law enforcement to legitimize the use of lethal force. Scenario 2. Fleeing the scene. Just 2 hours later, the official statement from the DPS shifted. The officer opened fire due to public safety concerns as the victim attempted to flee the scene. Inconsistencies with the physical evidence. The fact that 4 bullets pierced the victim's windshield directly contradicts the fleeing narrative. If a vehicle were reversing or driving away to escape, bullets would typically strike the rear or sides of the car, rather than entering head-on through the front windshield toward the victim's head, as shown in crime scene photographs. Legal focus regarding the use of lethal force. Under U.S. Supreme Court precedent, notably Tennessee v. Garner, it is unconstitutional for police to shoot an unarmed fleeing suspect who poses no immediate threat to the life of the officer or others. The fact that the DHS admitted to opening fire when the victim was merely fleeing effectively negates their legal defense of self-defense, absence of body-worn cameras. The fact that ICE officers in Maine were not equipped with body cameras means the most objective evidence is missing. This reduces the matter to a conflict between witness accounts and police reports, thereby eroding public trust in the investigation. Systemic issues. Involving ICE, this incident was not merely an accidental shooting. Rather, it was a consequence of ICE's systemic operational practices, pressure to meet quotas. Representative Chelly Pingree has bluntly pointed out that ICE is heavily funded and operates under pressure to meet arrest quotas, prioritizing the volume of arrests over community safety. This pressure leads to hasty and careless law enforcement actions. Abuse of authority against legal residents. Both the victim, Guerrero, who held a social security number and a work permit, and the individual originally targeted by ICE were legal residents. ICE's repeated targeting of this demographic by stretching the interpretation of immigration law, such as classifying individuals with pending asylum applications as residing illegally, reveals an alarming pattern of overreach, psychological impact, and local social division. Maine has historically been a state with very low crime rates and strong community cohesion. This incident has created deep rifts, erosion of trust, and the spread of fear. When a legal immigrant is shot dead in the street while heading to work at 7 a.m., it sends a terrifying message to the immigrant community. This fear paralyzes normal social activities, such as the case of an ICU nurse who was afraid to leave home for work due to the risk of wrongful arrest by ICE. State-level resentment toward federal agencies. A clear rift has emerged between Maine's political leadership, including Senators Angus King and Susan Collins, and Representative Pingree and the federal agency ICE. Local authorities are striving to gain access to evidence because they do not trust the impartiality of internal DHS investigators, who are effectively refereeing their own game. Media and political aspects. The pattern. Media outlets have linked this incident to a series of similar recent ICE operations in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Houston. This transforms the Maine incident from an isolated event into part of a nationwide trend of systemic enforcement-related violence. Electoral factor. The fact that Senator Susan Collins is currently campaigning for re-election has been highlighted. This indicates that the incident is likely to be rapidly politicized. Politicians are compelled to adopt a tough stance to demanding an investigation into ICE to appease voters, even if they belong to parties that generally favor stricter immigration controls. The fatal shooting of Joan Sebastian Guerrero in Maine serves as a prime example of the dangers inherent When a federal law enforcement agency operates without oversight or transparency specifically, the absence of body-worn camera sand is driven by quantitative performance targets. This incident is not merely a family tragedy. It is also a wake-up call regarding the precarious line between law enforcement and lethal abuse of power in the United States. The United States has just been shaken by what many would consider a political earthquake. Veteran Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has reportedly died unexpectedly. His passing allegedly occurred just before a scheduled appearance on Meet the Press and at a moment when the power struggle between Donald Trump and Republican senators was reaching one of its most intense stages. According to this account, Graham's death not only leaves a major vacancy on the Senate Judiciary Committee where key appointments for Trump's new administration are awaiting confirmation, but also forces the governor of South Carolina to hastily appoint Graham's sister, someone with no previous political experience, to temporarily fill his Senate seat. However, the detail that has generated the greatest shock and controversy is Donald Trump's response. During his first public remarks after Graham's reported passing, Trump allegedly made no mention of Graham whatsoever, despite Graham having spent the final years of his political career as one of Trump's most loyal allies and defenders. Drawing on Chris Hayes' analysis, this event is portrayed as far more than simply another tragic story from Capitol Hill. Instead, it is presented as exposing the ruthless pragmatism of modern American politics through four major themes. 1. The Lindsey Graham deal. Pragmatism taken to its extreme. Many observers have long viewed Lindsey Graham as an unprincipled political flip-flopper because he dramatically reversed course, transforming from one of Donald Trump's harshest Republican critics during the 2016 presidential campaign into one of his most steadfast supporters. Chris Hayes, however, offers a more nuanced interpretation. Rather than portraying Graham as someone manipulated by Trump, Hayes argues that Graham was an active architect of his own political transformation, a strategic adaptation. Graham recognized that the Republican grassroots had not fundamentally changed. Instead, they had simply shifted their political loyalty from George W. Bush to Donald Trump. To preserve both his influence and his broader political worldview, Graham chose to move with that current rather than join the Never Trump movement and risk political marginalization. Using Trump as a political instrument, Graham's lifelong political mission centered on a hawkish interventionist foreign policy rooted in the post-9/11 Republican establishment. He was willing to sacrifice personal pride, embrace political compromises, and even reverse his position after declaring he had had enough following the January 6 Capitol attack. His objective, according to this interpretation, was to use Trump's political strength to continue advancing an assertive American military presence abroad, particularly in conflicts involving Israel and Iran. 2. The Two Pillars Philosophy and the Naked Reality of Modern Politics. One of Graham's remarks at the 2025 Republican-Jewish Coalition Summit has been cited as perhaps the clearest summary of the Republican Party's governing philosophy over the past quarter-century. We're killing the right people, and we're cutting your taxes. Rather than dismissing the statement as political humor, Hayes argues that it distilled the party's governing coalition into its simplest form: money and military power. The quote captures the alliance between economic conservatives who prioritize tax cuts and national security hawks who favor an aggressive projection of American military power. By openly acknowledging these two priorities, Graham effectively suggested that many of the party's more complicated ideological debates were secondary. As long as Trump continued delivering on these two core objectives, much of the Republican establishment would remain willing to support his leadership. 3. Transactional politics and the harsh reality of the MAGA era. Trump's alleged decision not to mention Graham following his reported death is presented as a powerful illustration of what critics describe as the transactional nature of the MAGA movement. Within this interpretation of Trump's political world, there is no enduring concept of friendship, loyalty, or gratitude. Political relationships are judged almost entirely by their immediate usefulness. Graham devoted enormous political capital to defending Trump, helping him survive his second impeachment and serving as a bridge between Trump and more traditional Republican senators. Yet once Graham was gone, this account argues he instantly became politically irrelevant. From this perspective, Trump's silence sends a warning to other Republican politicians. Loyalty in the MAGA era is a one-way street. 4. A Senate numbers crisis. The problem of free agents. According to this account, Graham's death could not have come at a worse moment for Senate Republican leadership, creating both a political and mathematical challenge. The convergence of absences. With former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell reportedly hospitalized, losing Graham's vote would further weaken the Republican majority at a particularly sensitive moment: the Judiciary Committee battle. Graham played a central role on the Senate Judiciary Committee, where Todd Blanche, Trump's former defense attorney, was reportedly awaiting confirmation as Attorney General. Without Graham's influence and vote, independent-minded Republican senators such as Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska could potentially hold the deciding votes, giving them significant leverage over Trump's judicial and executive nominations. Conclusion: the reported death of Lindsey Graham would mark the end of the career of one of the most influential and pragmatic politicians of his generation. His political journey illustrates a central lesson about modern politics. Leaders may choose to compromise even with figures they once strongly opposed in pursuit of larger strategic goals. Yet the price of those compromises can be extraordinarily high. In the end, the legacy they hope to preserve, along with the respect they sacrificed so much to maintain, may ultimately disappear as quickly as the political alliances that once seemed indispensable. Late-night subpoenas, weaponizing executive power against a free press. The video discusses what it portrays as a highly intimidating legal action taken by the Donald Trump administration: the delivery of subpoenas directly to the private homes of the New York Times reporters at night. This move reportedly occurred amid growing criticism from press freedom watchdog organizations, which accused the administration of abusing its authority. The discussion quotes Eugene Daniels, who described a troubling reality in which many White House journalists were allegedly living in fear of personal retaliation that could affect both their professional work and their families. According to the program, the incident represented a new escalation in the already tense relationship between the president and the American media. The hosts analyzed the subpoena operation through 3 serious irregularities, arguing that this was not an ordinary legal procedure, but rather a campaign to weaponize executive power. 1. Breaking with traditional Justice Department standards, a reversal of established procedure. In previous leak investigations, the long-standing principle of the U.S. Department of Justice had been to investigate government officials first and avoid targeting journalists at the outset. Authorities were expected to determine which government personnel had disclosed classified information before approaching members of the press. An apparent contradiction. The video notes that only 30 days earlier, Attorney General nominee Todd Blanche had stated on Sean Hannity's podcast that the administration's policy was to begin with internal government investigations and not target reporters first. Sending subpoenas directly to the New York Times reporters was presented as a violation of the very standard the administration had recently articulated. 2.
Direct involvement from the White House and the FBI director. The program claims that the investigation was directed and driven from within the White House in coordination with the FBI director, rather than functioning as an independent,
technically focused Justice Department inquiry. Chris Hayes reportedly described this as hyper-penalization. According to this interpretation, the direct involvement of the highest political center of power suggested that the goal was not merely to uncover the truth, but to use criminal investigative tools to suppress dissenting voices. 3. A strategy of personal psychological intimidation, unusual timing and location. The subpoenas were allegedly delivered by agents to the reporters' homes late at night. Analysts on the program argued that this was unnecessary, because the government already knew the identities of the reporters and the location of the New York Times legal representatives, where subpoenas could have been served through normal legal channels during business hours. Therefore, knocking on reporters' doors at night was portrayed as a deliberate effort to transform professional pressure into a personal threat, sending a warning not only to the journalists involved, but also to confidential sources who might cooperate with them. Conclusion. The late-night subpoena operation targeting the New York Times reporters, as described in the video, raises concerns about a political environment in which legal procedures may be bent to serve purposes of political intimidation. According to the analysis, the episode creates a chilling effect on the press, forcing journalists to weigh their responsibility to report fearlessly and impartially against concerns for their own safety and the safety of their families when confronted with an executive branch perceived as willing to use its power in a punitive manner. Just 2 days before his official confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee to become the next U.S. Attorney General, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who previously served as Donald Trump's personal criminal defense attorney, was reportedly thrust into an extraordinarily precarious position. Federal Judge Kathleen Williams of Miami issued a sharply worded ruling criticizing Donald Trump's lawsuit against the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, a case that Todd Blanche had helped negotiate in May. According to the ruling, the lawsuit was pursued for an improper purpose. The decision alleged that Blanche attempted to use the federal courts to legitimize an amnesty-style settlement for entities connected to Trump while redirecting billions of dollars in taxpayer funds to resolve personal claims that lacked any basis in law. As a result, Judge Williams imposed Rule 11 sanctions, a serious disciplinary measure designed to deter attorneys from abusing the judicial process by pursuing frivolous or improper litigation new. In-depth analysis political analyst Brendan Ballou of the Public Integrity Project and strategist Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark, examined the controversy from two perspectives: the institutional crisis facing the Department of Justice and the Democratic Party's media strategy to block Blanche's confirmation. 1. The institutional erosion of the Department of Justice, the Justice Department as a personal law office. The video opens with the criticism that Todd Blanche has been acting more like Donald Trump's personal attorney than the nation's chief law enforcement official. According to the discussion, the fact that an acting attorney general has been sanctioned by a federal court for allegedly acting in bad faith represents an unprecedented development the judiciary pushes back. Brendan Ballou argues that Judge Williams' ruling signals that the federal judiciary is beginning to resist what he describes as the politicization of the Department of Justice. Although state bar disciplinary committees may hesitate to pursue severe professional sanctions such as disbarment because of political sensitivities, the court's direct imposition of financial sanctions and its public criticism have, in his view, dealt a significant blow to the credibility of the Justice Department under Blanche's leadership, potentially undermining its standing before courts nationwide too. The greatest political vulnerability: the Jeffrey Epstein files and the Republican Party's communications problem. Although the IRS litigation presents significant legal challenges, Sarah Longwell argues that most voters are unlikely to fully understand complex legal issues. Instead, she contends that Democrats possess a far more powerful political and communications weapon: the Jeffrey Epstein case files allegations of a cover-up. According to the discussion, despite legislation requiring greater public disclosure, Todd Blanche has overseen the continued withholding of more than 2 million pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein's network. Controversy surrounding Ghislaine Maxwell. Blanche is also criticized for allegedly approving the transfer of Ghislaine Maxwell Epstein's convicted Associatito, a lower security correctional facility described as offering comparatively comfortable amenities, including programs involving puppies, Pilates, and yoga. The court of public opinion. Focus group research discussed in the program reportedly indicates that voters across both the Republican and Democratic parties remain deeply angered by the continued secrecy surrounding the Epstein files. According to the analysis, the backlash has become so significant that former Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi was politically weakened in part because of controversy surrounding the issue. 3. The Senate's mathematical challenge Todd Blanche enters Wednesday's confirmation hearing, unable to afford the loss of even a single Republican vote in the Senate. According to the analysis, Democrats are not primarily attempting to persuade Republican senators through detailed legal arguments. Instead, their strategy is to flood social media with short video clips highlighting Blanche's responses perceived struggle-stow questions about the Epstein files by linking Todd Blanche's name to allegations of an Epstein cover-up. Democrats hope to place Republican senators in a politically difficult position. Supporting Blanche's confirmation, the argument goes, could expose them to accusations from future voters that they helped shield information connected to the Epstein case, creating a lasting political liability during upcoming elections. Conclusion: according to the analysis presented in the video, the federal court sanctions raise serious questions about Todd Blanche's professional judgment and legal ethics. However, the controversy surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein files is portrayed as the issue with the greatest potential to derail his nomination as Attorney General. The upcoming Senate confirmation battle is therefore framed as a test of whether sustained public pressure over a high-profile moral and political controversy can outweigh party discipline among Republican senators.